The paramedic's hands froze above the boy's trembling form. 11-year-old Daniel Matthews lay crumpled on the asphalt outside Lincoln Elementary, his small chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths that sounded like broken whispers in the autumn air. His limbs twitched with the telltale spasms of his rare neurological condition. Yet the uniformed man with the medical bag made no move to help. "Step away from the child." The voice cut through the gathering crowd like a blade. Margaret Whitfield stood 10 feet away, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at the paramedic with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her lips curved into something that might have been a smile, if not for the coldness in her pale blue eyes. This is clearly a behavioral outburst. The boy is faking. Daniel's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, knelt beside her student with tears streaming down her face. "Please, he needs help. This is real. I've seen these episodes before." The paramedic glanced between the teacher and Margaret, uncertainty flickering across his features. The radio clipped to his shoulder crackled with static before a dispatcher's voice emerged. "Unit 7, please confirm status of medical emergency at Lincoln Elementary." "Ma'am," the paramedic addressed Margaret with obvious deference. "The call came in as a medical emergency." Margaret's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "The call was mine. I witnessed the entire charade. That child threw himself on the ground the moment he saw the ambulance approaching. It's attention-seeking behavior. Nothing more." She adjusted her designer purse strap and stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried further than she intended. "Do you really want to waste taxpayer money on a performance?" The paramedic's hands dropped to his sides. 3 hours earlier, Daniel Matthews had been having what his mother called a good day. The morning sun streamed through his bedroom window as he carefully arranged his collection of medical textbooks, each one a gift from Dr. Sarah Chen, the neurologist who had become more than just his physician over the past 2 years. Daniel's condition, a rare form of juvenile myasthenia gravis, meant that his muscles could betray him without warning. But his mind remained sharp and hungry for knowledge. "Danny." Breakfast. His mother's voice carried up the stairs, warm and familiar. Elena Matthews had quit her job as an accountant when Daniel's condition was diagnosed, dedicating herself entirely to navigating the complex world of medical appointments, insurance battles, and the daily challenges of caring for a child whose body could fail him at any moment. Daniel carefully descended the stairs, one hand trailing along the banister his father had installed after the third fall. In the kitchen, Elena had prepared his favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with extra protein powder mixed in. The yellow mixture disguised with a sprinkle of cheese that fooled no one, but made both of them pretend normalcy was possible. "How are we feeling today, sweetheart?" Elena's eyes searched his face with the practiced assessment of a mother who had learned to read the subtle signs of impending muscle weakness. "Strong," Daniel replied, flexing his thin arms with theatrical bravado. "Strong enough to dissect a frog in biology class." Elena laughed despite herself. Her son's enthusiasm for science never wavered, even on his worst days. "Well, let's hope Mrs. Patterson doesn't actually have any frogs waiting for you." The drive to Lincoln Elementary took 12 minutes, a route Elena had memorized down to every pothole and traffic light. She parked in the designated area for students with medical conditions, a spot that had required 3 meetings with the principal and a letter from Dr. Chen to secure. As Daniel gathered his backpack, Elena slipped a small card into his front pocket. "Remember, if you feel an episode coming on, show the card to the nearest adult and ask them to call you immediately." Daniel recited with the weary patience of a child who had heard these instructions 1,000 times. "Mom, I'll be fine." But Elena's worry followed him through the school doors like a shadow. Margaret Whitfield first noticed the boy during third period. She had volunteered at Lincoln Elementary for 6 months, officially serving as a reading assistant, but unofficially appointed herself the school's moral guardian. Her own children attended the prestigious Westfield Academy across town, but Margaret believed it was her civic duty to monitor the public school system and ensure it maintained proper standards. Daniel was sitting in the hallway outside the nurse's office, his head resting against the wall and his eyes closed. To Margaret's eye, he looked perfectly healthy, just lazy. She had seen this type of behavior before, children feigning illness to avoid responsibility, enabled by parents who refused to instill proper discipline. "Shouldn't you be in class, young man?" Margaret's voice startled Daniel from his rest. He looked up with tired eyes that held far too much knowledge for an 11-year-old. "I'm waiting for the nurse. I have a medical condition that sometimes requires monitoring." "A medical condition?" Margaret's tone suggested she found this highly dubious. "And what exactly is wrong with you?" Daniel's hand moved instinctively to his pocket, where the emergency card waited. He had learned that some adults responded better to official terminology. "I have juvenile myasthenia gravis. It affects my neuromuscular junction and can cause sudden weakness or respiratory distress." Margaret's eyes narrowed. The boy spoke with the vocabulary of a medical textbook, clearly coached by permissive parents. "That sounds very convenient when you don't want to attend classes." Before Daniel could respond, Nurse Peterson emerged from her office. "There you are. Daniel, come in. Let's check your vitals." Margaret watched as the boy disappeared into the nurse's office, filing away her observations for future reference. In her experience, children like Daniel were the reason the school system was failing. Too much accommodation, not enough accountability. The incident began at 2:47 p.m. during afternoon recess. Daniel had been feeling strong all day, strong enough to attempt the monkey bars, despite his mother's gentle warnings about overexertion. He made it halfway across before his hands began to tremble, the familiar warning sign that his muscles were about to surrender. He dropped to the soft mulch below, intending to rest for a moment before heading inside. But as his feet touched the ground, his legs buckled completely. The world tilted sideways as Daniel collapsed, his breathing becoming labored as his diaphragm muscles began to weaken. Through his dimming consciousness, he heard the screams of his classmates and the running footsteps of teachers approaching. "Mrs. Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos. "Someone call 911, get the nurse." Margaret Whitfield had been observing the playground from her position near the school entrance, waiting for parents to arrive for pickup. When she saw Daniel fall, her first instinct wasn't concern, but vindication. Here was the proof she had been waiting for. The confirmation that this child was manipulating the adults around him. She approached her cell phone with the confidence of someone about to solve a problem. The 911 dispatcher answered on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency? This is Margaret Whitfield at Lincoln Elementary. I need to report a false medical emergency. A student is faking a collapse to get attention. Please send officers to prevent abuse of emergency services. The dispatcher's voice carried professional concern. Ma'am, are you trained to assess medical emergencies? I'm a concerned citizen, witnessing fraud. Margaret replied sharply. This child has been seeking attention all day, and now he's thrown himself on the ground the moment adults appeared. Don't waste paramedic resources on a performance. By the time the ambulance arrived 7 minutes later, Daniel's condition had deteriorated significantly. His breathing was shallow and rapid. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and his eyes rolled back intermittently as his body struggled to maintain basic functions. Mrs. Rodriguez met the paramedics at the school entrance, her words tumbling over each other in desperate urgency. "He's been down for almost 10 minutes. He has juvenile myasthenia gravis. His mother's number is in his emergency card. Please, you have to help him." But before the lead paramedic could respond, Margaret positioned herself between the medical team and the fallen child. "Gentlemen, I'm the one who called this in. What you're seeing is not a medical emergency, but a behavioral incident. The child is conscious and responsive, simply engaged in attention-seeking behavior." The paramedic hesitated, his training warring with the authority in Margaret's voice. She spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to being believed, her expensive clothing and articulate speech lending credibility to her claims. "Ma'am, we still need to assess—" "Officer Martinez is en route to document the fraudulent emergency call," Margaret interrupted, gesturing toward the approaching police car. "I suggest you wait for official confirmation before proceeding." Daniel's breathing grew more labored. Officer Martinez had known Margaret Whitfield for 3 years, ever since she began her volunteer work in the community. She had been helpful in identifying truancy issues, reporting suspicious individuals near schools, and generally serving as an extra set of eyes for law enforcement. Her calls were always taken seriously. "Mrs. Whitfield," he nodded as he approached the scene. "What's the situation?" "That boy has been seeking attention all day, claiming to have various medical conditions. Now he's staged this collapse the moment emergency services arrived. It's clearly fraudulent, and I believe the family should be investigated for medical fraud." Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice shaking with desperation. "Officer, please. This child has a documented neurological condition. His mother has been fighting for proper accommodation for 2 years. He's not faking. Look at his breathing pattern. Look at his color." Officer Martinez glanced at the boy on the ground, but found Margaret's explanation more believable. Teachers were often too emotionally involved with their students to maintain objectivity, and medical fraud was increasingly common. "Step back, ma'am," he instructed Mrs. Rodriguez. "Let's allow Mrs. Whitfield to explain what she observed." As Margaret began her detailed account of Daniel's supposed deception, the boy's condition continued to deteriorate. His lips had taken on a blue tinge, and his chest movements were becoming increasingly erratic. The paramedic caught his partner's eye and gestured toward Daniel, but Officer Martinez raised his hand. "Hold on assessment until we sort this out. Can't have emergency resources wasted on false alarms." Minutes stretched into an eternity as Margaret held court, describing Daniel's morning visit to the nurse's office as evidence of premeditation, his articulate explanation of his condition as proof of coaching by manipulative parents. Her voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who had never questioned their own judgment. "You see, officers, this is exactly the type of behavior that burdens our healthcare system. Parents who refuse to discipline their children properly, instead teaching them to fake illness for attention and special treatment." Mrs. Rodriguez fell to her knees beside Daniel, her hands hovering over his form as she was forbidden to provide comfort. "His lips are blue. Please, someone listen. He's dying." Margaret's expression hardened. Dramatic language won't make fiction into fact. The crowd of onlookers grew larger as word spread through the school. Parents arriving for pickup stopped to gawk at the scene, some pulling out phones to record the commotion. Children pressed their faces against classroom windows, forbidden from going outside, but unable to look away from the drama unfolding on their playground. Among the gathering crowd, Elena Matthews received the phone call that every parent of a medically fragile child dreads. The school secretary's voice was tight, with barely controlled panic. "Mrs. Matthews, you need to come immediately. Daniel collapsed during recess, and there are paramedics here, but they're not. There's some confusion about his condition." Elena dropped everything and ran. Dr. Sarah Chen was reviewing patient files when her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Emergency at school. They won't treat Daniel. Please help." The message was followed by the address and a plea, "They think he's faking." Dr. Chen had seen this scenario before, though never at a school. Daniel's condition was rare enough that many medical professionals had never encountered it, leading to dangerous delays in treatment. She grabbed her medical bag and emergency authorization documents, calling ahead to Lincoln Elementary as she ran toward the parking garage. The principal, Dr. Robert Hayes, answered on the first ring. "Lincoln Elementary." "This is Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm the attending neurologist for Daniel Matthews. I understand he's experiencing a medical emergency, and there's been some confusion about his condition." Dr. Chen, "Thank goodness. Yes, there's been a concerning situation. The paramedics are on scene, but they've been advised that Daniel might be faking his symptoms." Dr. Chen's blood ran cold. "Who advised them of this?" "A volunteer, Margaret Whitfield. She claims to have witnessed the entire incident and believes Daniel is seeking attention." Dr. Hayes, "I need you to listen very carefully. Daniel has juvenile myasthenia gravis, a potentially life-threatening neuromuscular disorder. If he's experiencing a myasthenic crisis, every minute of delay increases his risk of respiratory failure. No untrained individual is qualified to assess his condition." Dr. Hayes felt the weight of liability settling on his shoulders. "What do you need me to do?" "I'm en route. ETA 6 minutes. In the meantime, have the paramedics begin assessment immediately. If anyone interferes with medical care, they are potentially liable for criminal charges." When Elena Matthews arrived at Lincoln Elementary, the scene that greeted her was her worst nightmare manifested. Her son lay motionless on the asphalt, surrounded by a crowd of adults who were talking instead of helping. She fought through the gathering spectators, her mother's instincts overriding any concern for social protocol. "That's my son!" she screamed, dropping to her knees beside Daniel. Her hands immediately went to his face, checking his color, feeling for his breath. What she found made her blood turn to ice. "He's in crisis," she announced to anyone who would listen. "His breathing is compromised. He needs immediate medical attention." Margaret stepped forward, her voice cutting through Elena's desperation with cold authority. "Mrs. Matthews, I presume your son has been putting on quite a performance this afternoon." Elena looked up at the woman addressing her, taking in the expensive suit and the self-satisfied expression. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" "Margaret Whitfield. I volunteer here at the school, and I witnessed your son's theatrical collapse. Quite convincing, I'll admit, but hardly authentic." Elena's world narrowed to a tunnel of rage. "My son is dying. He has a documented neurological condition. If you interfere with his medical care, I will personally ensure you face criminal charges." Margaret's laugh was condescending. "Threats won't transform fiction into medical emergency. Mrs. Matthews, perhaps if you had taught your son proper discipline, instead of enabling his attention-seeking behavior, we wouldn't be in this situation." The accusation hit Elena like a physical blow. For 2 years, she had fought insurance companies, school administrators, and skeptical medical professionals to secure proper care for her son. She had endured whispered suggestions that she was overprotective, that Daniel's condition was psychosomatic, that she was manufacturing medical crises for attention or financial gain. "How dare you?" Elena whispered, then louder. "How dare you make assumptions about my child's medical condition when you have no training, no knowledge, no authority to assess his needs?" Officer Martinez stepped between the two women. "Ladies, let's keep this civil. Mrs. Whitfield has provided valuable insight into the situation." Elena turned her desperate gaze to the paramedics. "Please, I'm begging you, assess him. His emergency card has all his information, his doctor's contact information, his medical history. Don't let him die because someone without medical training decided he was faking." The lead paramedic looked uncertain, caught between conflicting authorities and his own medical instincts. That's when Dr. Sarah Chen arrived. She emerged from her car like an avenging angel, her medical bag in one hand and her phone in the other, already documenting everything she saw. Her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had spent 15 years in emergency medicine before specializing in neurology. "I am Dr. Sarah Chen, Daniel Matthews's attending neurologist, who is preventing medical assessment of my patient." The crowd fell silent. Dr. Chen was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she commanded immediate respect through sheer professional presence. Margaret stepped forward, undaunted. "Doctor, I'm Margaret Whitfield. I've been observing this child all day, and what you're seeing is a performance, not a medical emergency." Dr. Chen's gaze could have frozen steel. "Ms. Whitfield, are you a physician?" "I'm a concerned citizen with common sense." "Are you licensed to practice medicine in any capacity?" "That's not relevant. Anyone can see." "Ms. Whitfield, you have interfered with emergency medical care for a child with a documented life-threatening condition. You are not qualified to assess his symptoms, determine the validity of his medical needs, or provide guidance to emergency personnel." Dr. Chen knelt beside Daniel, her hands immediately beginning professional assessment. "Officer, I need you to clear this area so I can treat my patient." Officer Martinez hesitated. "Ma'am, Mrs. Whitfield called in the emergency and has been cooperative with our investigation." Dr. Chen looked up from her examination, her expression deadly serious. "Officer, this child is in myasthenic crisis. His respiratory function is compromised, his muscle control is failing, and he requires immediate medical intervention. Ms. Whitfield's interference has already caused a dangerous delay in treatment. If she continues to obstruct care, she is potentially liable for assault charges." The legal implications hit Officer Martinez like a sledgehammer. "Mrs. Whitfield, please step back and allow the medical professionals to work." But Margaret was not ready to surrender her authority. "This is ridiculous. The boy is clearly conscious and responsive. Look, his eyes are tracking movement." "Consciousness doesn't preclude respiratory failure," Dr. Chen replied coldly, pulling a small device from her medical bag. "Daniel's oxygen saturation is 82%. Normal is 95 to 100. He is literally suffocating." She turned to the paramedics. "I need supplemental oxygen immediately and transport to Memorial Hospital. Notify the emergency department that we have a juvenile myasthenic crisis en route." The paramedics jumped into action, their professional relief obvious. They had known something was wrong, but had been prevented from following their training by the competing authorities of law enforcement and Margaret's confident assertions. As oxygen flowed through the mask covering Daniel's face, his color began to improve almost immediately. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the boy they had been told was faking began to breathe more easily. Margaret's confidence wavered for the first time, but he was walking around normally this morning. "Doctor," Chen's voice was ice. "Myasthenia gravis is characterized by fluctuating symptoms. A patient can appear completely normal and deteriorate to crisis within minutes. That's what makes it so dangerous, and why assessment must be left to medical professionals." As Daniel was loaded onto the stretcher, Elena climbed into the ambulance beside her son. Before the doors closed, she looked directly at Margaret Whitfield. "You nearly killed my child because you couldn't admit you don't know what you're talking about." The ambulance pulled away with sirens wailing, leaving behind a crowd of witnesses who were beginning to understand the magnitude of what they had almost allowed to happen. Margaret stood in the empty playground, the certainty that had carried her through the afternoon cracking like ice under spring sun. Around her, parents pulled their children closer, their expressions ranging from shock to anger to fear. Mrs. Rodriguez approached the woman who had nearly cost her student his life. "How could you?" she whispered. "How could you be so sure about something you knew nothing about?" Margaret's response was automatic, defensive. The boy was seeking attention. Anyone could see. Anyone could see that you don't know the difference between a medical emergency and attention-seeking behavior. Mrs. Rodriguez interrupted, "But you were so confident, so certain that you convinced adults with authority to ignore a dying child." The teacher walked away, leaving Margaret alone with the growing realization that she had made a terrible mistake. But Margaret Whitfield was not accustomed to admitting error. Over the next several hours, as news of the incident spread through the community, she doubled down on her position. The boy had been seeking attention. She insisted to anyone who would listen. The mother was overprotective and had coached the child to fake symptoms. The doctor was probably complicit in a long-term fraud. These assertions might have remained confined to Margaret's social circle, if not for her decision to post about the incident on the Lincoln Elementary Parents Facebook group. "Parents need to be aware of what happened at our school today," she wrote. "A child faked a medical emergency, wasting valuable emergency resources and traumatizing other students. When concerned adults tried to prevent this fraud, we were threatened and intimidated by enablers who refused to hold children accountable for their behavior. This is what happens when we prioritize feelings over facts." The post quickly garnered responses, but not the support Margaret expected. Parents who had witnessed the incident began sharing their own accounts of what they had seen. Video footage emerged from phones that had captured Daniel's blue lips and labored breathing. Medical professionals in the community chimed in with explanations of myasthenia gravis and the dangers of interfering with emergency care. Within 6 hours, Margaret's post had been shared beyond the school community, spreading to local news groups and medical advocacy pages. The story began to take on a life of its own. Volunteer blocks medical care for dying child. At Memorial Hospital, Daniel stabilized quickly once he received proper treatment. His myasthenic crisis responded well to medication and supportive care, but the emotional trauma of the incident would take longer to heal. Dr. Chen sat with Elena in the family conference room, explaining what had happened and what they could do to prevent future occurrences. "The delay in treatment was inexcusable," Dr. Chen said bluntly. "Daniel could have suffered permanent respiratory damage or death because an untrained individual convinced emergency responders to ignore medical protocols." Elena's hands shook as she held her coffee cup. How do we protect him from this happening again? We document everything. We file complaints with the school district, the police department, and the emergency medical service. We ensure that protocols are in place to prevent unqualified individuals from interfering with medical care. Dr. Chen leaned forward. And we consider legal action against Ms. Whitfield for obstruction of medical care. Elena had never considered herself a confrontational person, but watching her son nearly die while adults debated whether he deserved help had awakened something fierce inside her. What would that accomplish? Accountability. Legal consequences for actions that endangered a child's life. And perhaps most importantly, establishing precedent that protects other children with disabilities from similar interference. The decision to pursue legal action was not made lightly, but Elena found herself supported by an unexpected network of advocates, parents of children with disabilities, medical professionals who had witnessed similar incidents, and legal experts who specialized in healthcare discrimination all offered their assistance. The story reached local television news 3 days after the incident. Reporter Jessica Williams had been covering education and healthcare issues for 8 years. But the Daniel Matthews case represented something she had never encountered: a documented instance of a child being denied emergency medical care because an untrained volunteer convinced authorities he was faking his symptoms. This isn't just about one child or one incident, Williams explained during her investigative report. This represents a systemic failure at multiple levels. Emergency protocols were abandoned based on the opinion of someone with no medical training, no familiarity with the child's condition, and no authority to assess medical emergencies. The report included interviews with Dr. Chen, Elena Matthews, and several parents who had witnessed the incident. It also featured expert commentary from emergency medicine physicians and disability rights advocates. Margaret Whitfield was invited to participate in the report, but declined through her attorney, who issued a statement. Mrs. Whitfield acted as any concerned citizen would when witnessing suspicious behavior. She maintains that her assessment of the situation was reasonable, based on her observations. The statement only served to fuel further outrage. Social media exploded with commentary from parents, medical professionals, and disability advocates who pointed out the dangerous implications of allowing untrained individuals to override medical protocols. The tipping point came when security footage from the school's exterior cameras was released. The video showed Daniel's collapse, his obvious distress, and the shocking contrast between his medical crisis and Margaret's calm assertion that he was faking. It showed Elena's desperate attempts to help her son while being physically blocked by adults who should have been protecting him. Most damaging of all, the footage captured Margaret's expression as she watched the child suffer, not concern, not uncertainty, but satisfaction. The look of someone who believed they were winning an argument, even as a child's life hung in the balance. The video went viral within hours of its release, shared thousands of times across social media platforms with captions like, "When privilege nearly kills," and "This is what ableism looks like." Margaret Whitfield found herself at the center of a national controversy she had never anticipated. Her social media accounts were flooded with comments from strangers around the country who had seen the footage and were horrified by her actions. Her employer, a prestigious law firm where she worked as a paralegal, placed her on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. The school district acted swiftly to contain the damage to their reputation. Superintendent Dr. Linda Rodriguez called a press conference to announce immediate policy changes regarding volunteer authority and emergency medical protocols. No volunteer or non-medical staff member will ever again be permitted to interfere with emergency medical assessment, she announced. We are implementing mandatory training for all staff on recognizing medical emergencies and working with emergency responders. We are also establishing clear protocols that prioritize medical needs over any other considerations. But the story continued to grow beyond the local community. National news outlets picked up the footage, and Daniel's case became a symbol of broader issues around disability discrimination, medical bias, and the dangerous combination of privilege and ignorance. Medical advocacy organizations used the case to highlight similar instances where children with disabilities had been denied appropriate care because their conditions were misunderstood or dismissed. Disability rights lawyers pointed to the incident as an example of how ableist attitudes could have life-threatening consequences. The legal case against Margaret Whitfield moved forward with unprecedented support from medical and legal experts. The charges included obstruction of medical care, reckless endangerment, and civil rights violations. Her actions had not only endangered Daniel's life, but had violated his fundamental right to medical care based on his disability status. Margaret's attorney attempted to negotiate a plea deal, but Elena Matthews refused any agreement that didn't include acknowledgement of wrongdoing and commitment to disability awareness education. "This isn't about revenge," Elena explained to reporters. "This is about ensuring that no other child faces what Daniel faced. It's about establishing that there are consequences when ignorance and arrogance combine to endanger vulnerable people." The trial became a media sensation, drawing national attention to issues of medical discrimination and disability rights. Expert witnesses testified about the complexity of Daniel's condition, the appropriateness of his medical care, and the dangerous precedent of allowing untrained individuals to override medical protocols. Dr. Chen's testimony was particularly powerful. "Ms. Whitfield's interference nearly killed my patient. Her actions demonstrate the lethal combination of prejudice against disability and misplaced confidence in her own judgment. This case should serve as a warning that medical emergencies must be left to medical professionals." The most emotional moment came when Elena Matthews took the stand to describe watching her son struggle to breathe while adults debated whether he deserved help. "I will never forget the feeling of helplessness as I watched my child suffering, while a stranger who knew nothing about his condition convinced people in authority that his life didn't matter," she testified. "No parent should ever have to fight for their child's right to medical care in an emergency." Margaret Whitfield's defense attempted to portray her as a well-intentioned volunteer who had made an honest mistake based on reasonable observations. But the security footage made this narrative impossible to maintain. Her satisfaction as Daniel suffered, her dismissive attitude toward his mother's pleas, and her continued insistence that she was right, even after medical professionals intervened, painted a picture of someone whose prejudices had nearly proven fatal. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. Margaret Whitfield was sentenced to 6 months in jail, 200 hours of community service with disability advocacy organizations, and required to complete extensive education about disability rights and medical ethics. But the legal victory was only part of the story's resolution. Daniel's case had sparked a national conversation about disability discrimination in emergency situations, leading to policy changes across the country. Emergency medical services nationwide revised their protocols to prevent non-medical personnel from interfering with patient assessment. Schools implemented new training programs to help staff recognize and respond appropriately to medical emergencies involving students with disabilities. The Daniel Matthews case became required reading in medical ethics courses and disability rights law classes. It served as a stark reminder of how quickly prejudice and ignorance could escalate to life-threatening consequences. 6 months after the incident, Lincoln Elementary unveiled a memorial garden dedicated to promoting understanding and acceptance of students with disabilities. Daniel, fully recovered from his physical injuries, but forever changed by his experience, spoke at the dedication ceremony. "I almost died because someone decided my life wasn't worth saving," he said, his voice clear and strong despite his young age. "But I'm still here, and I want to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else." Elena Matthews stood beside her son, tears of pride mixing with the lingering trauma of that terrible afternoon. The garden was beautiful, filled with plants chosen for their accessibility to students with various disabilities. But its true purpose was educational, ensuring that future generations would learn from the mistakes that had nearly cost Daniel his life. Dr. Chen, who had become more than just Daniel's physician through their shared ordeal, established a foundation to provide emergency medical training specifically focused on rare conditions and disabilities. The Sarah Chen Foundation would go on to train thousands of emergency responders, teachers, and community volunteers, preventing countless repetitions of Daniel's near tragedy. Margaret Whitfield served her sentence and completed her required community service, working with disability advocacy organizations to educate others about the dangers of medical bias and the importance of deferring to professional expertise. Whether her change of heart was genuine or simply compliance with court orders remained unclear. But her story served as a cautionary tale about the deadly consequences of prejudice disguised as common sense. Years later, Daniel Matthews would go on to study medicine, inspired by Dr. Chen's example and driven by his own experience of nearly being denied care when he needed it most. He specialized in emergency medicine and disability advocacy, becoming a powerful voice for patients whose conditions were misunderstood or dismissed. The story of that terrible afternoon at Lincoln Elementary became a cornerstone of medical ethics education, disability, rights advocacy, and emergency response training. It served as a reminder that in matters of life and death, expertise must trump prejudice. Compassion must override suspicion, and the right to medical care cannot be subject to the uninformed opinions of bystanders. Elena Matthews often reflected on how a single afternoon had changed, not just her family's life, but had sparked a movement toward better understanding and protection of children with disabilities. The price had been almost unbearably high, but the legacy ensured that Daniel's suffering had meaning beyond their personal trauma. In the end, silence had been broken, not by the loud voices of prejudice and ignorance, but by the quiet truth of a child's medical need and the unwavering advocacy of those who refused to let that truth be buried. The garden at Lincoln Elementary bloomed each spring as a testament to the power of standing up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, and the necessity of ensuring that every child's life is valued and protected. The rain had stopped falling that day, but justice, like the careful tending of a garden, required constant attention and care to flourish.